Welcome to Potential Show. This is a show where we sit down with founders and investors to talk about their stories and secrets to succeed in the international startup world and make an impact on society. So before we start this episode with our amazing guest Phil Wickham, I'd like to introduce a little bit more about his career and his fund Sozo. So Phil is a veteran venture capitalist with experience at Jeffco and Coppen and is currently serving as a general partner of Sozo Ventures. In addition to Sozo, Phil serves as the executive chairman of Kaufman Fellows, whose program has been producing multiple elite capitalists such as Mamoon Hamid. Obviously, that's a general partner of Craner Perkins. After selling his first Tokyo-based startup to Princeton Review, Phil began his career as a venture capitalist. He served as a GP at Jeffco America Ventures and as a partner at Munich-based Coppen Ventures. Phil also teaches at Stanford Engineering and Waseda Commerce. Now, speaking of his fund Sozo, it's a Bay Area VC firm investing and supporting IT ventures like Square, Twitter, Palantir, Zoom, and more to expand to Japan. The firm is managed by its founders and current GPs, Phil and his partner Koichiro. Phil sold his first venture in Japan, and Koichiro was involved with a multitude of startups and became a founding member of Yahoo Japan with Taizo-san. Their experience in Japan helped develop unique skills as well as a broader network, which in turn helped drive decisions in investing in and supporting American IT ventures that seek to expand into Japan. Well, let's look at their portfolio. So their portfolio include Zoom, Twitter, MongoDB, Fastly, Square, Palantir, Coinbase, Flexport, and more. It's a pretty amazing portfolio. Why were they able to get those great deals? Well, you will know the secret and their method to get those great deals in this great episode with Phil Wickham. Let's listen to it. Phil, thank you so much for being here today.
It's very nice to be here.
All right. It's really nice of you to be here today. It was great having you at our Potentials event on global expansion last December. Although we were supposed to have you for our February event this year, but unfortunately we couldn't due to COVID-19. But I'm really happy to have you here again. All right. Good. So I think I want to start introducing you to the audience. So before moving forward, I'm sure a lot of audience are just like me, curious about how an American guy ended up having ties to Japan, especially in the VC and startup world. So could you tell us a little bit more about your story?
Sure. As it relates to Japan, I grew up in upstate New York in a fairly rural area, but my father had business ties to Japan, and I got exposed as a child. I was always very interested in it and couldn't get there in high school or college for various reasons, athletic commitments and academic commitments. So I went in the late 80s, soon after graduating. I just came over because I wanted to spend 6 months and learn about the country. And I ended up, as happens in a lot of cases, accidentally falling into a business opportunity that turned into a pretty interesting startup in the field of executive education and corporate education, and built up a little company that I merged eventually with the Princeton Review in Tokyo. And we did that for about 3 years. And that took my 6-month plan to almost 3 years, and quite an interesting experience and quite lucrative. And towards the end of that tenure, having started a company with no relevant experience, no plan, no credibility, I started another company in Tokyo in a similar field in education with capital and experience and credibility. And I knew all the right words, and I could make a spreadsheet. And by all measures, that second startup failed horribly. And a very interesting experience to have doing two startups in a row as a young guy, and it was very
Right.
interesting to do it in Tokyo, and that became a catalyst for me going into graduate school and eventually going to the Kauffman Fellows program to sort of figure out like what is the DNA of a successful startup.
Mm.
And it's certainly I only had an N of 2. I had a sample size of 2. And
Right.
I was pretty sure that being completely clueless was not the ultimate formula, which was what I did when I was successful.
Right.
And that took me on a long, probably 30-year journey of exploring, what that could be.
I see. Okay. And then you started the fund, Sozo, right? But before going into that, I want to ask a few things. So you told me that you started 2 companies, one that you were able to sell and the other didn't really go well. What was the company that you founded? What are the companies you founded here in Tokyo?
Well, the first company was called Reference Media, and sold it in about 7 months to the Princeton Review. The second
Wow.
company we never got around to naming. We just called it Newco. And
Newco, okay, interesting.
it failed. It failed before it even got a name. It was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster.
And the capital that you got, that is from Japanese investor or from the States?
The first startup was completely self-funded. It was very profitable out of the gates. I was undergrad, was a early 20s aerospace engineer. I didn't know anything about finance. I'd never taken a finance course. So I didn't know. I just thought company needed to be profitable, or why would you do it? So it was profitable, made money, and then the second company I personally financed.
I see. Interesting. And then what exactly brought you to Japan? So you came here when you were undergrad, right?
Right after my undergrad, I came, and it was a thing that you probably any 23, 24-year-old can understand.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to go to graduate school. My thinking was, if I don't do this now, it's going to get harder and harder to do it. And I had thought about doing it in high school, and I just couldn't. I had too many athletic commitments to take a year off, and I wanted to do it in college, but aerospace mechanical engineering doesn't work well for transfer because your courses are too rigorous. So you basically
I see.
Vacation. So I just never did it. Then I said, all right, I'm going. And it was not like some grand plan. I think I had $1,000 in my pocket. I didn't speak Japanese. I had a floor of a friend I could sleep on. That was my plan.
Nice. Cool. And so the second
Pretty
company
much I've lived my life since to the age of 56. So.
Okay. So the second company that didn't go well, what do you think was the reason for that failure? Was it the language barrier that you had, or not understanding well about Japan, or what was it?
No, I mean, it had nothing to do with Japan. It was 2 other Americans. There was no language barrier. It was what I eventually came to learn after 30 years is I think in the fashionable analysis of a startup, generally people move towards the quality of technology, just technology in and of itself. And if not, they may look at the finance side. The basis of all great startups is culture, alignment, great communication, people understanding they need to be aligned, somebody taking the lead of making sure everybody's aligned. And then the second piece is business model and making sure you're building something that is delightful and profitable and scales easily. We never even got to the business model. We fell apart culturally. And that was something that I took away as kind of the effective leader of that organization. I took it away as the responsibility that I would learn. And I try to never let it happen again in any other organization I lead, is to invest an incredible amount of time in making sure everybody is clear on what everyone else is doing, that they understand their purpose, that we are working towards alignment, and we have systems in place when we get out of alignment, which is what humans are going to do. So that's a quick punchline of 30 years of studying this problem. Interesting.
So those two experiences that you had kind of pushed you to the venture capitalist world, or what was it like, the key story there?
No, I still didn't know what venture capital was. I think the Princeton Review might have had a kind of a venture capitalist, but I didn't know what it was. I went to graduate school at a engineering school in upstate New York called Rensselaer, and I had a fellowship there to study the history of the on-campus incubator. So this is back in the early 90s, before incubators were a thing. And they had this, it was the first ever university-based incubator in the world, and they had 110 graduates and 5 IPOs and some acquisitions. They had some success. No one had ever studied. And so my fellowship was to study the companies that were going in, what were the inputs, the value add of the incubator, and what were the success metrics coming out of it. And so I worked with a thesis advisor and a dean there, and we looked through a number of models, and we leaned on a couple of alumni who were prominent venture capitalists to understand, like, what do you as a venture capitalist try to put into the companies, and how would you measure success? And that eventually led us to a pretty cool conclusion. But it was also my first introduction to the business and going, what is this? Like, you can actually have a job where you get paid to invest in little tiny startups. It was 93, probably 1993. So that caught my eye. And as fate would have it, hang on one sec here. I got my computer. So as fate would have it, this same thesis advisor, towards the end of school, he had a relationship with an entity called the Kauffman Foundation, where he had co-authored a book on university-based incubators. And his co-author at the foundation was sketching out something called the Kauffman Fellows Program. Right. And he said, this is kind of interesting. You should look at this. There had never really been a system for hiring venture capitalists. There might have been 1 or 2 jobs a year in the whole country. And typically, at least in Boston, the person who got the job in Boston was General George Dorio's top student at the second year manufacturing and innovation class. And no one knew that the job existed. That person just typically got handed off to somebody very famous, and that was it. Right. This was the first time to kind of create a talent pool, and my dean sort of looked through the criteria and said, they're really looking for people who are entrepreneurial focused, who can handle risk, who can handle uncertainty. And at the time, it was a US citizen program. So here's this guy who's done startups in Japan, and he threw me into the mix. And even then, when I started doing that, I didn't go in with the intention of being a venture capitalist. I went in with basically the same thesis I had going into graduate school, which is, I have these 2 experiences that don't make sense. Here I'm clueless and I'm successful. Here I have a plan and I have ability, and it's a disaster. I mean, it's really pretty binary. So I went in with the same intent, saying, gosh, it'd be really interesting to go in for a couple of years, learn how these professionals do this, take away as much of that as I possibly can, and go run a company. Right. And what ends up happening with a lot of people in venture is it sucks you in. It is so exciting. You're learning new industries every day. You're just surrounded by all of these amazing entrepreneurs. Right. And I actually don't really have the mindset of an entrepreneur. I have a better mindset of a venture capitalist, which is, I don't focus that well. I don't need a lot of feedback. I don't need a lot of stroking. What a great job you did today. And I actually am very comfortable doing 100 things at once. And I'm very comfortable believing in myself. And I just sort of fell into it. But what was interesting as I look back on my career, and before Sozo, it was a couple other firms that I helped get off the ground, is I've always approached the venture industry as an entrepreneur, as looking at
Sozo was there already before you joined?
No, I started I co-founded it with my partner. So, but I've always looked at the industry anywhere I've gone if I have a choice to to join an established firm, or look at a way to start a firm that's doing something that no other firm does. I gravitate towards the new thing. So in some ways, I'm like venture capitalist because I'm always doing venture. Sure. But mostly what I do, and even when I was heading up Kauffman, I was always very interested in how we could create new ideas. Right. Last time
when you were in Tokyo in December, you told me that venture capitalists needs a macro point of view. Would you say that's kind of the trait that you look for when you're looking for a partner for Sozo Ventures?
A macro point of view?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for sure, both a macro, so a high altitude level of what went on in the world, and I think also a very high level of curiosity and humility. And what you look for in an entrepreneur is almost an insane level of self-belief and laser focus.
Laser focus, sure.
Those are stereotypes. They're not always that way, but sure.
Okay.
And I think the other thing you're looking for in a partner is very, very deep shared values and very complementary skill sets. So you're working off the same operating system, but your apps kind of, complement each other, because what Co and I do is, we always end up doing things the same way, and we believe in each other, and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But what he brings to the table is quite different than what I bring to the table.
I see. So you just mentioned Ko-san, Mr. Nakamura, your co-founder. So I want to talk more about your fund, but also I want to talk a bit more about before you started fund. So you joined JAFCO, America Ventures. And then you finally became a GP there, I suppose. And then you also managed Copen Ventures, which is a Munich-based venture fund. And then after that, you, I think, became a CEO of Copen Fellows, and then started Sozo Ventures, right?
Yeah, I'll walk you through the journey real quick, because it might be useful for people to see how these things. I think, especially in venture, but often in life, are a series of opportunities, sometimes coincidence, sometimes accident.
Lots of serendipity, I guess.
The firm I was with when I was at Copen Fellows was an extraordinary group of people, but they had some dysfunction. They ended up removing their founding partner, who I was tied to as a Copen Fellow, which was quite interesting experience, to see that kind of trauma. And I ended up staying, and I liked the guys, but one of the senior partners there was aware of the new president being hired at JAFCO, and his daughter, who ended up becoming a very prominent international venture capitalist based out of London, he would always say to me, "Don't stay here. Don't stay in Boston. It's too small. It's too parochial. You need to use this international experience." And when this guy calls, he's like,
the Copen is based in Boston?
No. When you do when the fellowship is, so when you do your fellowship, it's funded out of Kansas City, out of the foundation, but it's a practicum. So what they do is they place you in venture funds all over the country. So my class was a couple in Boston, a few in New York, many in Silicon Valley, North Carolina. We were all over the country, and then we would fly and gather every quarter for education, but we were mostly just off in the firm working.
I see. Yeah, makes sense.
So it was kind of a funny situation, because this guy's like an old gruff guy. He doesn't say much. He walks into my office. He's like, "Pick up the phone." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Just pick up the phone and talk." And so I pick up the phone. I go, "Hello." And the other guy on the end, he goes, "Hello." I said, "Dan told me to talk to you." And he said, "Well, it's funny. Dan told me to talk to you." I said, "So what's going on?" He said, "Well, I've just taken this job at JAFCO, and I'm sort of I'm trying to find the right kind of talent. And he said, you might be loose in the socket," meaning like I might be leaving. I might be thinking of leaving. I might be getting fired, whatever that meant. I'm like, "Oh, I have no idea." I said, "Oh, am I?" And he said, "Well," and we started laughing. And I said, "Well, what are you looking for?" And he said, "This is, so this is 95. This is before international ventures." Like, "Well, I'm looking for somebody who has tier 1 venture experience, but also sales and marketing experience in Japan with some language ability." I said, "Okay, that's today. That's not a very hard spec." But back then, he said, "So how long is your list?" And he said, "You are my list." So I've never, because I don't know. And I said, "Frankly, I probably am the only person who checked those 2 boxes." So we flew out, ended up joining there, and I joined as an associate, and eventually was a general partner in the second and third fund there. Our second fund, USIT2, vintage 97. Was an extraordinary success. It returned just shy of 16 times cash on cash. One of the best performing funds of all time. And we, like a lot of firms, we were not ready for that kind of success. And we started to fly apart, and our key guy left, and then another guy left, and then I got recruited away to a fund out of Munich. And actually, it's again another story. Is this kind of detail helpful?
Sure. Yeah. Your story, how you became a capitalist. So.
Yeah. So it's another, it was kind of interesting. It's another kind of an accident where I got a call from a headhunter, and I've known her for, she goes, "I need your help." I said, "What is it?" She goes, "I got this guy. He founded and built all of Microsoft Europe. He reported to Bill Gates for 17 years. He's trying to hire somebody in Valley for his firm. He's got 2 other European operating guys. And he just can't find the right guy. We sent him like 50 people. He's rejected everybody." And I was at Kaufman. I was on the board. I wasn't running it yet, but I always loved to meet. I would always meet fellow travelers, especially international venture people. She said, "Would you meet with them?" I go, "Sure, you know I will." So I went and had breakfast with him. And from the second we sat down, we started arguing. And he said, he's got this guy who built Microsoft Europe. He's got another guy who ran Deutsche Telekom's broadband group. He's got another guy who built half of Amazon Europe. He's like, "We need an operating guy in the Valley." And I was like, "Last thing you need is an operating guy. That's crazy. Like, you don't need an operating guy. You need somebody like, why do you think venture is so easy? How are you going to do venture? How are you going to structure deals? How are you going to turn all these advantages into a product?" We argued for like 3 hours at the Sheridan breakfast place. Like, and I come away, I'm exhausted. I'm like, I feel so bad. I feel this guy's visiting my country. I'm not usually like that, but God, we were just going at it. And so this lady calls me, and she's, and I'm like, "Oh gosh, here it goes." And she calls me, and I'm like, "Mark, I'm so sorry." It's like, "What did you do to him?" And I go, "Oh, I was going to try to tell her it was terrible as this. I didn't even get it." She goes, "He loves you." I'm like, "What?" I go, "We argued for 3 hours." She goes, "Don't you know?" And I said, "Don't I know what?" She said, "Bill Gates's measure of a person is their willingness and ability to argue a point. And at Microsoft, everything's based on debating and arguing. And he wants to cancel his trip or cancel his flight home and meet with you all day tomorrow. He wants to." And I said, "Well, I'm not looking. I'm employed, I'm working for a venture firm." And she said, "Well, do you want to talk to him?" I said, "He's a pretty interesting guy. My firm is kind of falling apart. I want to learn more." And so I ended up staying, and we talked. And then he's like, "I think you should, think about joining us." And his 2 other partners were coming in the next week. And I met with them. I had dinner. Little did I know I brought a really cool, obscure bottle of wine. And little did I know they were both wine collectors, and they wanted someone on the team who knew California wines. There's all these funny coincidences. And I ended up joining them, and I was there for about 4 years. And we did something very similar to what I did at Jafco. And then, and what we ended up doing it at Sozo, which is building an edge that you can sell to entrepreneurs. In this case, the edge was access to European markets.
I see. So you're always based in San Francisco or Bay Area, right? So you work for Japanese venture capital firm Jafco, and then the European one, Koppen, but you were the guy in Bali, kind of dealing with the Silicon Valley companies.
Right. I left Boston in 1996, and I've never lost my tax residency in California. But as the joke goes, I was resident in California with a co-residency on United Airlines. So when I was at Copan, I was in the air to Europe at least once a month. And with not as much with Jafco, but now with Sozo, even more than that. So yeah, I've always been based in California, but I've always been very mobile, and I'm a big believer in airplanes. This was pre-Zoom. Now that we have Zoom, it's a little better, but
you're a cross-border VC, so you always travel, I suppose, right?
And it's cross-border. I think it's all cross-border. I think these entrepreneurs don't care about borders, and I think what we have to do as an industry is just bring an edge or a product. As a venture firm, we got to bring something that the entrepreneurs don't get.
Right. Could you tell the audience about what's cross-border VC? in a very simple way?
Yeah, I would say, I think there's a couple ways to think about it. So one
Sure.
is the way you position your investment strategy.
Hmm.
So you can be cross-border if you basically say, I'm not going to constrain myself to one country.
Okay.
Great example of that would be Sequoia. Sequoia Capital seems to invest all over the world. They have a Chinese fund, an
China
India
fund, right?
and I think Sequoia will go anywhere to invest. So that's one way, and there are several firms like that. Norwest is another. So these are large funds that have offices all over the
Okay.
world. That's
So
not
cross border in sense of areas that invest.
right. That's not what we do.
Sure.
We restrict ourselves to U.S. entities. Now the entities can emerge from other parts of the world, but they need to be capitalized and really operating heavily out of the U.S. So that's one. What makes us cross-border is the edge or the advantage we try to bring is to help companies with their market growth across borders.
Sure.
So we obviously we specialize in understanding the very difficult, very lucrative markets of Japan. And that has always been a very interesting place to focus if you know how to do it. So that's the other piece. And there are funds that help move from the US into Latin America, US into Europe. You'll see a lot of those models. And there's several funds that do the kind of work that we do.
Right. So in summary, you're a Bay Area-based venture fund, late-stage venture fund, investing in Silicon Valley companies that seek for expansion to the other area, especially Japan, with Japanese LPs.
Yeah, let me modify that a little bit.
Okay.
We use a stage definition called readiness. And the reason we say readiness is that you can be ready at the early, the mid, or the late stage. What we're finding is we started off in sort of a mid and maybe later stage assumption, but we're finding that both from an opportunity as well as a need standpoint, we are talking to companies very early. We talk to them at the A stage more and more. So,
oh really? Okay.
I would characterize us as readiness is our hurdle. Our stage is agnostic. We really don't care about the stage. We just wouldn't want to take a company into the world of Japanese markets without them being, it's a very challenging. It can be very time consuming if they don't get it right. So we want to make sure that.
Okay, I see. I think I want to talk a bit more about that stage. So Sozo has an amazing portfolio. You have invested in Square for their Series E. You invested in Coinbase for their Series C. You invested in Zoom. You invested in Palantir for their Series G back in 2012. Most of your investments are what's called late stage, right? Why do you like those stages? Is it because of the nature of your fund, or what's behind that?
I would say, for example, Square was classically late stage. It was the pre-IPO round. We would have invested early. We could have gotten in. We were a very young firm. So Twitter was quite a late stage investment, which was our first investment.
Which stage was it?
Twitter was a secondary purchase of common shares out of
I see.
Employee. Right.
Okay.
We have a couple. But I think there's a couple rules of thumb. So if you're looking at a very large scale enterprise deal, an enterprise platform, say a Palantir, a Fastly, something like that, which is also one of our companies that went public. Right. You're probably going to invest later because those companies take a longer time to build enterprise presence in the US, which is a very important proof point. You're probably not going to get enterprise buy-in. For example, you're not going to get a Japanese bank to buy into a US platform unless they have some enterprise traction at a peer, a Citibank, a Morgan Stanley, something like that. And those companies just have long sales cycles, and it takes a long time to get them up and running.
Right.
We have investments in a company like Insightly, which is a transplanted Australian company to the Bay Area, and we invested in the B. And they're a small medium enterprise CRM platform, and they have a freemium model, so people pull it down from all over the world.
CRM, customer relation management.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they had hundreds of customers in Japan. When we met them, they were $3 million with Series B. So when you get into a smaller footprint of a technology or less complex technology, then we can go earlier and earlier. Now, what's happening? One of the trends that's happening that's very important is that the ties from Japanese organizations, banks or retail or whatever, their ties to their activity, M&A activity, and ties to U.S.-based subsidiaries is stronger and stronger. So now what we can do is we can actually work with companies earlier on testing the Japanese market by testing them with a subsidiary in the U.S., which didn't used to be very useful because they didn't talk very much. And that's actually becoming, Japanese organizations are becoming proactive on using those entities as test beds. So basically you can test and penetrate the Japanese market without changing your behavior as a domestic player. And then once you prove traction there and you make sure that you've created the proper threads back to Tokyo, when they're ready to expand to Tokyo, you don't have to reinvent and re-educate the executives. They've been watching this thing for years. That's super critical to accelerating the growth.
I see. Interesting. And so you mentioned about kind of moving to Series A deal to, but I suppose you have LP too, right? So when you're fundraising, what was the kind of thing you told to your LP? You have like Line, I guess, Daiichi, some of the best Japanese companies, IT companies too. What thing you told them? Like, we're gonna invest in late stage companies that's low risk, or what's the thing you told them?
I mean, we tell them that it's readiness stage with I mean, I won't go into, there's a lot of legal jargon in those.
Sure.
The message that we're sending them is just what I told you, is we're looking at readiness stage.
Okay.
And the bias is toward mid to late stage, but what we've been communicating the last decade, year by year, is wow, these opportunities are getting earlier and earlier. And as we go out with what will effectively be our fourth vehicle, our Roman numeral 3 fund, we'll be more clear with them. And they understand this as well, because they're getting more sophisticated and they're looking more and more aggressively. They understand, like, we've got to be in there much.
Very interesting.
Right?
I've been seeing some, So I've been seeing some, a very old venture capital firm in the Valley, or the famous one, actually going into earlier stage deals these days. And I was really interested, why that's actually happening. But is it maybe because what you said, the readiness of global expansion is becoming like kind of toward like early stages?
There's a little bit of that, but there's also the tools available to entrepreneurs right now to build a company are remarkable. And if you go back to, this is hard, I don't want to sound like the dinosaur, but let me give you a quick dinosaur story. Back in the mid 90s, when you invest in a software company, you'd give them a couple $1 million and they'd go away for a year and they'd write their product. Like, that's how long it
just for server and stuff, right? Yeah.
Spaghetti coding a product, and then you come back and maybe they got a pilot company, and you're like, okay, this looks like it has promise. Let's give them a few more $1 million in their Series B, and they're going to get a couple customers. And their C, they're going to get the vertical, and the D, they're going to get another vertical. And if all these execute, then they'll go public for $150 million, and they'll raise 50, and then they'll grow to whatever they grow to. All right, something
going
like that.
Public at 150 mil. You're talking about American companies,
250 million in revenue with 30 to 80 million. In valuation with 30 to 80 million.
Sure.
Sure. If you go back and look at the number, it was a tiny business, right? And now you can see Series Bs that are, the Series B of Zoom was 180 pre, and that would have been an IPO back in the day.
Right.
So if you look at it now, with the tools available, with the internet as a marketing and sales platform, what ends up happening in the A is it becomes very clear very quickly who's going to win and not win. And once you see a winner, there's an inclination for the early investors to pile in, to maintain ownership. Why give it away?
Right.
So there isn't the syndication culture that there was many years ago, because the risks are taken out of these deals so fast because you see the traction. So if you don't get in early, you don't get in. So that's part of it is you can see the sophistication earlier. And the other part is just basic survival. If you don't get in early, it's really hard to get in.
Right. Actually, I want to ask one follow-up question for that. So when you discover, an early stage company with great potentials, you may want to invest in, but maybe they're too early. Say they're in maybe an early stage, pre-Series A. Is it possible for you to actually invest in those companies, or what would you do? Would you keep in touch with them, maybe do consulting for them, so that you can kind of, keep them close so you can potentially invest in their Series A or B deals?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. It's a question we're sitting in right now. And certainly at a minimum, if we really like the company and we really like the specialist early stage investor, I actually don't understand. I don't understand what these great early stage funds do. I'm absolutely captivated by their gifts to figure out these companies. We're pretty good at what we do, but what they do is really interesting and really fascinating. So at a minimum, we would stay in touch with them. We'd certainly want to consult. We'd want to make some connections to them. We learn a lot about companies by connecting them to our LPs as potential customers. Right. A great way to learn about a company. So we're happy to do that. Our LPs also really like it. But what we're realizing is, from a risk standpoint, it probably makes sense for us to participate as early as we can, even if that participation is rather small. So making the commitment to the entrepreneur, writing the check while there's still a lot of risk, that is, and being selective about it, but that does set us up with access and relationships and potential to write larger checks into the B and C if appropriate. We do tend to go after very big ideas. Big ideas are very expensive to build and scale. But again, going back to 20 years ago, gosh, we had a $2 billion IPO in a company called Sienna. I mean, it was stop presses. It was the biggest news of 6 months, and a $2 billion IPO won't even get an article today. So you're looking at much higher cost to build and scale, market these companies. But my gosh, the rewards are orders of magnitude higher. So you get in a position yourself to invest in a robust fashion. Is a smart way to play the business right now.
I want to ask, would you invest in a company as an angel investor if you see a company that's in early stage that you can't invest with your fund? Would you invest in an angel investor? Did you ever?
Personally, I do it all the time.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And most venture capitalists do.
Okay.
And if it were to turn into something that you would invest in as a firm, the legal advice I get, and I think it's the wisest advice, is you would give your firm the right to buy your personal shares, just to avoid the conflict of interest. So you're not funding a markup in your own personal checkbook with your LP's money. You would give up a small personal return, but if it was interesting enough for your fund, you'd give the fund the. In fact, I would insist that the fund buy it, because if you're going to invest at a valuation of 10, you would certainly buy your shares at a valuation of 2 or 3. So I would just insist that that everything just gets put onto the balance sheet of the firm. That's just. I see.
Could you tell us how many angel investment you've done so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was just thinking about that. I was organizing them. Sometimes I forget that I do them because I almost always invest in people I'm close to, but probably not many, 10. And I probably have five alive right now.
Okay.
And I have some really good ones that I passed on. Like I passed on Salesforce.
Anti-portfolio.
My anti-portfolio, my number one is Salesforce. I passed on that.
Oh my God, really? Wow. At which stage?
Oh, in the A. I only left about 85x on the table.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I just couldn't get I couldn't get my arms around a $2 million revenue company with a $100 million valuation.
Oh my God. Wow.
I couldn't get there. And the guy who did it, my friend who introduced, is a lot smarter at early stage than I am, and they make $1 million. So.
Right. Interesting.
So they all have.
So I think we learned a lot about Sozo's investment strategy. So helping American companies go into international markets like Japanese market with your network and connections you have from Japanese LPs, and your experience in Japan with your co-founder Mr. Nakamura. I want to kind of like shift from this venture capitalist viewpoint to a founder. So what kind of value does Sozo bring to companies? So let's say I'm a venture founder that seek expansion to Japan. Why should I choose you from other cross-border VCs?
So there's a couple of ways that we get introduced. So oftentimes, so let's look at an example like Coinbase.
Yeah, sure.
And this is really credit to Ko and his genius. But in a nutshell, I think Ko saw an opportunity for Coinbase to do something in Japan. I think that Coinbase quite rightly was interested but skeptical. They recognized the value of Japan, but this is right after the Mt. Gox huge Bitcoin fraud in Japan. And so you've got sort of a COVID level of fear around anything crypto related, right? Like they're not letting any crypto people into the airport.
The crypto winter,
And what Ko did was basically say, I think there's a huge opportunity in the Japanese banking community. We're going to help you get to the right people.
Right.
We're going to talk to all the banks. We're going to get the banks to work with the regulatory agencies. We're going to help guide you through the regulatory process. And that ended up becoming, and we're going to help you find some test customers. And so over the course of about a year, back and forth, basically bringing these together, making those things happen. So it's really about taking the cost and uncertainty out of going into Japan by maximizing the chance that they're talking to the customer that's most likely to want to deal with them. And then within that customer, talking to the executive who has budget and who has clout. And so therefore, a lot of our value can maybe 80% of the time is coming back to the entrepreneur and say, you don't want to go to Japan. You don't want to go now, because we talked to the 4 clearly most promising customers and they're all saying it's not the right time yet. We do have within the Sozo strategy, we have a bias towards large scale data intensive platforms. So we don't do a lot of light apps and consumer stuff. We do very intensive stuff. And oftentimes those products are layered on top of other capabilities, right? So like an anomaly investment requires a pretty broad implementation of products like Splunk.
Sure.
So sometimes the feedback will be, hey, you may think we've got this fundamental layer in place, but we're 2 years away. So if you come in and start selling, we can't build what you're selling on top of what isn't in place yet. So we'll monitor that, we'll feed that back. So it's really it's really very high efficiency, and also giving them guidance to understand the value of going after tier 1 logos, not building your way up through second and third tier companies. That's just not the way to do it in Japan, is to go after the very top brands, top customers, get in efficiently, get sales going. Don't build up knowing when to build up an organization, the right timing, how to put yourself in a position to attract the best people, those sorts of things. Like it's really just, we want to maximize your dollar into Japan, dollar out. And we have a whole very broad system of doing that. Those are just some high level things.
If I'm okay, that's good. Okay, thanks for that. And now I think we want to move on to more specific deals related questions. So you invest in like really great companies, like the system that we're using right now, Zoom, which went multiple X after this crisis, COVID-19 crisis. But also you invested in great companies like Twitter, Square. And Twitter, Square, they are both companies that's currently operated by Jack Dorsey. And how would you describe your relation with Jack Dorsey or Twitter, Square, those companies?
Well, so a few questions. I mean, we have a friendly relationship with Jack. We had some very interesting debates. Twitter was was very much through their finance and marketing group and the work we did there. We didn't interface with Jack very much. We did interface with Jack on Square, and mostly around some of the distribution strategies and Co's controversial idea of putting them into Lawson versus the more kind of common sense, let's put them into a Docomo store. Let's sell these chips in a tech store, when you're actually trying to get Square into the hands of small retailers that they don't go to the Docomo store, but every couple of years to renew their phone, but they're in Lawson every day. Those sorts of things. And we had just a wonderful debate between Taki Nami-san, the CEO of Lawson, who's now the CEO of Suntory. Both of them were LPs. And Jack, and Nami-san made a very, very compelling argument, and that ended up with a great success. So that was our interaction. But a venture firm, when you're dealing with companies of that size and somebody, Jack, we don't tend to interface with him that much. We interface more with the direct report, typically
global expansion,
finance or global revenue are the people we work with on a day-to-day basis. I think if we reached out to Jack and said, hey, we have a question and we need some help, I think he'd be very helpful. I think he feels indebted to us. But we're not, that would be star chasing. That's not something we need to do. We'll get a better reference into a hot deal through a CFO to CFO connection, because they actually understand what we do. Because the CFOs will go, oh my gosh, these guys helped us cut our budget into Japan by 2/3, and we got to where we wanted to go twice as fast. Like, you need to talk to these guys. That's actually as or more powerful.
I see. Interesting. And so I want to ask a follow-up question for that. Maybe you can't answer, maybe you can answer. So Twitter and Square, they both expanded to Japan with your help too. And I mean, I use it personally every day. I use Twitter this morning, and also yesterday I used Square to purchase some stuff.
You use Zoom, and you use Fastly, and you use Mongo.
MongoDB.
You don't see Fastly and Mongo, but they're, Fastly is what's
it's backend.
We're writing on Fastly right now.
Oh, really? Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, there's an article 2 weeks ago, which we loved, that said Zoom is no longer the fastest growing stock of 2020. It's now Fastly. We're like, oh, that's our other.
That's your investment. Wow. And then also, like, this question, when I was, running this question, I was checking my Glamour with Glammarly, which is also in your portfolio, right? So, well, thank you, Phil, for your investment. And then, I wanted.
We're just thanking the CEOs for letting us in. We didn't build any of it. We don't deserve any credit.
Right. I mean, you helped them expand. So, and then the question that I want to ask is, how do, Jack or in Twitter or Square, they see Japanese market? So a lot of American companies, they want to, get a piece of Japanese market before they go public, because Japan is like, the third biggest market, right? Is Japan just like the third biggest market to make revenue for them? Or, is this something special for, Twitter or Square in regard to their expansion to Japan?
No, I think it's a great question. I think if you start, so the first thing I would say is Japan's not the third biggest market. It's the second biggest market, because China's not available to any of the companies we back. And no venture capitalist worth their salt would encourage their companies to go to China. If you get a very high quality group like Sequoia or GGV come in and they want to guide them into China, you would take it more seriously. But my gosh, that's still a wasteland. That's the view. And it's changing. Changing in a good way, but still tough. So realistically, Japan's the second largest market. I think that at the first level, everybody would say, gosh, we'd love to have Japan. And then you get into it and you basically 95 to 98% of the experience around the table, whether it's board or executive, have had horrible experiences trying to crack the Japanese market. And that's just because they've gone about it all wrong. And then you get the few that have had great experiences in Japan, like, oh my gosh, does this juice our revenue? If you can get in Japan and build trust and get to the level of performance you need to keep those players, it's very high margin. And lo and behold, gosh, just competing in Japan makes us a better company. And oh my gosh, you walk into Indonesia or Singapore or Vietnam or whatever, they pay attention to whether you've won Toyota or whether you've won Mitsubishi Bank or whether you've won Yamato. Like if you can win those customers, you're going to have a lot of political air cover if you're a regional bank or a regional, a regional manufacturer, retailer, whatever it may be. So I think that's where it sort of splits off, is that you get these people that either have had good or bad experiences. The classic bad experience in Japan falls into at least two really common categories. One is they hire a consultant who's had one, maybe successful experience in Japan or one or two successful experiences in Japan.
Right.
And they basically say, the route I went 10 years ago with this company is the route I'm going to take you. And I'm going to take you through all the people I know. And the odds of those being the right people to grow your company are pretty much zero. And this is the reason what we do with a company is we put them up to 30 buying groups or 40 buying groups across all these different corporations to see what the general traction is. We don't have any biases, and we in fact have competitors within our LP base because we're not there to serve them at the expense of the entrepreneur. We're there to serve the entrepreneur first, and they know that. And the other one is you just see people say, we're going to go get Japan. Let's go hire people and put them on the street. And the difference in the people you can attract. So when you hire somebody in Japan as a head of Japan, you want somebody super experienced, Japanese, they've had success in the past, they've done multiple things. Well, the person you can hire, if you go in as XYZ startup from Benchmark or Sequoia, like get people's attention. But if you go in and you have that same syndicate, and before you even put people on the ground, you found a way to sell into Mitsubishi Bank and a Yamato and and a Suntory, well, then you land and you've got these 3 tier 1 world-class customers. The caliber of person you can hire as a head of Japan,
Very
the roof.
interesting.
And then you as you expand, and this is fundamental rule of global expansion, is when you go into a country, your first hire is 95% of your success. And if you get an okay person or a mediocre person, you're probably going to have okay or mediocre performance, which is not what you want in Japan. And if you can win the market, holy mackerel. I mean, you look at the story of Square when they went public. They went public on 2 international markets, the UK and Japan. And Japan was a great part of their story.
Didn't know that. Okay, interesting. Wow. So now I think I want to go ask another specific deal question. That is Zoom, the system that we're using right now. So how did you get this deal? Did you personally know Eli Kwan, the CEO, before the investment, or how did this happen?
No, we were invited in by one of the syndicate members. Who was.
What syndicate actually?
So
could you explain to the audience?
The primary syndicate was Emergence Capital Partners and Sequoia as the 2 largest shareholders. And it was an introduction from Emergence, and the partner on the board, Santi Subatowski, he is Latin American. He's from Argentina, and he understood the value of having expertise. He knows we're old friends. We've done a lot of stuff together, and he gave us a crack at trying to win a piece of the deal. And we had already been working with Zoom. We had already done a lot of work. We loved the product. We knew the product. A lot of our 3 or 4 of our LPs were doing various big projects with Zoom. And this is before COVID. Eric is an immigrant from China.
Yep.
He understands. He had built WebEx. He understands international markets, and we were able to win him over and get a piece of the deal. And it took us a long time. And we were super thrilled. We didn't imagine it would be this great, but Eric's a very special guy. It's talk about going back to my original lesson. I defy you to find any survey, Glassdoor or anything else that doesn't rate Zoom as the best culture to work in Silicon Valley. He's legendary for building and protecting an amazing culture. And
absolutely.
That is a huge reason they've had this level of success, because they've scaled 50x in from a user base in 6 or 7 months. Nuts. Yeah. That's unheard of. Normally that would crush any technology, but they've been able to, the product works beautifully.
Right. I mean, yeah, it really supports our life now in this COVID-19 crisis. I go to school with Zoom.
It is our life, right? I mean, this is where we all live. We all live in Zoom, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this call with Zoom, and I'm going to do a bunch of other podcast recording with Zoom.
Of course you.
So yeah, I mean, it's a great thing. And so when was the Zoom deal? Was it in which year was it? At which stage?
It was also a secondary. We did it about 2.5 years ago.
I see. Okay, very cool. Nice. So then I want to ask some other questions about what's going to actually happen in this COVID-19 era, right? So you're a cross-border VC fund. You do a lot of cross-border investing, supporting, and that I think requires a lot of travel. And there's a worldwide travel ban right now. You can't travel a lot. How do you think this cross-border expansion or supporting would happen in this COVID-19 crisis? Like a lot of Zoom calls or?
Well, I mean, I think in the short term, sure.
Yeah.
A couple of things to be clear about with the venture market. And we had these questions around the subprime mortgage meltdown in 2008. How does this impact you? Short-term market movements and these kind of 1 to 2 year crises, they really don't affect venture that much.
Okay.
This will go away. Now, if we're at a point where this thing turns into another Spanish flu or we're locked down for 2 more years,
right,
we're going to have such economic issues that none of us are going to be worried about how we're going to do venture. We're going to be in a real crisis, right? So I think we have 2 potential developments in the fall. One is that this virus will attenuate and we'll get through these elections and we'll maybe start better data from the media, because right now there's not a really good data out there. It's one extreme is spinning it one way, one extreme, in my opinion, is spinning it the other way. The answer is probably somewhere messier and in between, but these things do eventually attenuate and go away, and probably by spring we're back to normal. For us in our rhythm, we work in these 10-year funds that are typically 13 to 14 years long. So 1 to 2 years doesn't disrupt us that much.
Okay.
So what we've seen in the data makes a ton of sense, and this was just put up by a couple different people, that in the last 6 months we've seen Series A deals go up. So Series A investing is more active than ever. That makes sense because those are oftentimes local. B and C rounds are down, and that's
as in volume, right? As in volume of investments.
The number of deals is down. What I understand, and I haven't researched deeply, and I just read this today from a trusted source, is that the average round size that does get done in the B and C stages are up. That makes a lot of sense, because what basically is going to happen is the bar gets higher.
Interesting.
Companies, as they move from some base narrative of proof to a narrative of scale, bar is going to be higher for people to write those checks. Those companies that do have those proof points and people that do have those funds available, they are going to pile in more aggressively. So we've seen that happen. We led a B round in a company that went, 60-70% over the original target. And because there's just a lot of interest in the company, and they're more than happy to raise more money in this time, even with the dilution, because of the uncertainty. So time is going to tell, Rian, in this. Like, it's going to depend a lot. If we're still in total chaos in January heading into the spring, you might start to see a much higher abandonment of the asset class by LPs, and you might see there's a lot of small, interesting funds that have groups of large number of small private LPs, like their jump to institutional stability. That could be really tough. So you could see a lot of those funds fall to the wayside. Not sure. I think if you've got tier one institutions and you have a track record, you can make the argument that guess what happens in these downturns?
Right.
Your investors, there's more time. Guess what happens? The quality of your investment process goes up, and the caliber of the companies available goes up. The correlation to these downturns in the general economy and overperformance in the vintage of venture funds is very strong. So the argument you're making is for that.
I see. Well, then I want to ask you, so do you think you can invest in companies that you've never met? I think this is a kind of a topic and question that's, in this venture industry, a lot of people are asking. Personally, myself, I have a clients right now that I have never met, but that's just, clients. But when it comes to investment, I think that's like to the next level. What would you say about that?
We did 2 this spring.
Oh, really? Wow. You never met the founders?
Surprised me. No, I mean, we had Zoom and we know the people around the table very well. We know the companies very well. Our LPs use the products. They think very highly of the companies. But yeah, we did several Zooms with them, but we didn't meet them and shake hands, which I was surprised about.
Wow.
I was surprised at first. And then now that we've done it, it's not that big a deal.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I mean, so I think your focus of investment is like in the one that can go global, and then software, IT, software, but not really like, light app, but more of a infrastructure kind of IT businesses. Did your focus of your investment change in this COVID-19 crisis?
No. I mean, if you look at the things we did, very, very consistent, large, complex enterprise plays. So even a Grammarly, which although it is a freemium model, consumer download, the underlying AI platform and how they run the business is extraordinarily complex. So that's like Square. People look at Square and go, "Oh, it's a little transaction chip." No, actually, it's a finance platform for small and medium enterprises with a massive data advantage that nobody knew about.
Square Capital, yeah.
Well, yeah, and that was always that was the core part of their story, which I didn't talk about. So no, it hasn't changed. I mean, we have a comfort zone. We aren't, we did a gaming deal that was a little bit out of our comfort zone, but still it's also a gaming platform. So it has titles, but also has an online platform. So we want to push that boundary. We're looking right now at a medically related insurance play that we can argue is somewhat out of, our comfort zone, but in some ways very, very comfortable. So no, nothing. It's okay. The business is fun. The business is like, it's like a big oil tanker. It kind of sets its course and it goes. It doesn't turn. There's not a lot that can make it turn. Not once you're up and running.
I see. So Phil, you are veteran venture capitalist, very experienced venture capitalist, and also an entrepreneur. And this is my last question, but I want you to tell the audience that is aspiring venture investors, how should they start a fund? This is a question I also asked back in December, and I think I first answered incorrectly. I think I just said fundraising, right? But that wasn't really it. So could you actually tell that again to the audience?
Sure. I actually just had this conversation with a friend today who's trying to get a fund off the ground. So I think that,
nice. I
think that there's a very simple thing to do. Probably 3 steps you could do in an hour or 2. So, answer 4 questions. The questions would be, what is the sector you're investing in? What is the stage you're investing in? What's your geography? And the 4th question is, what's your edge? And and your edge should be sharp, and it should be important, and it should help you win deals. Then I would say, based on that strategy, what does your sweet spot investment look like? I see myself investing $2 million at the Series A. Then you say, okay, how many of those could I do in a year? And then multiply that by roughly 4 years, which is going to be the investment period of fund. So let's say I think I could do 4 deals a year. That's $8 million a year. Over 4 years, that's $32 million. I factor in that I'm going to invest 80% of my capital because 20% is fees. That works out nicely. I didn't mean for it to do this, but it works out to be a $40 million fund. So you have $40 million, raise it. Eight is going to pay your fees. 8 million will pay your fees over 10 years. And then you have 32 to invest. So now you've got, okay, now I've framed it. And then what I would, if you're sitting in front of me, I would say, okay, give me your portfolio of those 32 companies. Right now, if you're going to go out and start investing, give me 5 companies you would target. Write them on the whiteboard. And I'd have them write the companies on the whiteboard. There's companies that are live. And if they can't answer that question, like I have 10 companies I would kill to invest in, I wouldn't even take them very seriously, because if you're not thinking, if you need a checkbook to think about this, you're not a venture capitalist. You're like, you are obsessed with this. So you write 5 or 10 or whatever it is, and then circle the best one. Like if you had to start with one, what would it be? Circle it and say, okay, go do that deal. Whether it's 10,000, 50,000, doesn't matter the amount. Go figure out how to scrape together the money and get the entrepreneur to take your capital and use your edge, and get that entrepreneur to build a reference for you on wow, I had Rion, and Rion did something that if he wasn't there, we would have lost enterprise value. He created this enterprise value. And the other thing it allows you to do is see if you can do it. See if you like it. You may hate it. And gosh, it's so great to do one deal and hate it than to sign up for 10 years and have that ball and chain, be a prisoner. It's not a sexy business. It's a grind. And we compare it sometimes to things like making movies. It looks sexy, but if you know people who make movies for a living, it's a tough, grinding, slow kind of business. But if you love the grind, it's awesome. It's a fun way, right? So it gives you a taste for that. And some people will say, well, where am I going to go get 50,000? Well, if you can't raise 50,000, how are you going to raise 40 million?
Sure. There you go.
So if you just have these things, and I did this with Co. When I first, Co and I first talked about it, I knew him very well from Kaufman, but I gave him this and he's like, I want to get LinkedIn or Twitter. I said, all right, go get one of them. I was like, usually they go away, they never come back. Co comes back, he's got Twitter, and this amazing strategy. I'm like, all right, this guy is the real deal. So that's normally that's what I would do. But the expression of the fund has to come through your personal zone of genius. It has to come through your purpose. If you don't build it through your best self, you have no chance of getting into an interesting level of deals. And gosh, just getting into the top 30%, that doesn't even guarantee you won't even make a profit. You have to get into the top 10% to be marginally interesting. You have to get into the top 5 to be a really serious fund. So you've got to be, you got to be pretty stellar. And you don't have to have superpowers. You have to match the strategy of the fund to the thing you do really well. It doesn't have to be big. It has to be sharp. And you've got to drive it in there, and you've got to earn your spot and build your credibility. And that's the advice I would give people.
I see. Interesting.
And make sure the other thing I say to people, and I may have said this to you before, is being an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is like having these programs where you can check your grades in college every day. I know exactly where I am with my lit class and my history class and my math class. I can see every quiz, every homework. Like right now, I know exactly what my grades are in every class. That's one of the benefits of being an entrepreneur. You have a lot more pressure in the short term, but every day, every week, every month, are you good or not?
Right. Yeah.
Being a venture capitalist is like going to college for 4 years and never getting any feedback from the professors. And you show up for graduation in the 4th year and you find out if you get a
Got it.
you have to have a level of self-belief, because You might look at the professor and go, oh, that professor gave me a dirty look, or that test seemed really hard. And I have no idea where I stand. Like, I don't know if I failed that last class 2 years. I don't know anything, right? Because the data you get in venture doesn't mean anything unless it's a cash on cash return.
Right.
Everything else is meaningless. And normally, you've probably heard this in the business, lemons ripen first. So oftentimes you're going to learn you're stupid before you're smart. So by the time you get that fourth, and it's about 4 or 5 years where you start to get some real feedback, probably by the fourth year, you've probably gotten more bad news than good news with regards to your talent as a venture capitalist. And you got to keep going. And some of these people, they go for 10, 15 years before they ring the bell and they become rock stars. Mike Moritz tells the story that he didn't do anything for 8 years, and he eventually won the firm. But he didn't do Google or Yahoo in his first 2 years. He did those in like his 12th and 15th year or something like that, like very late in his career. So you have to have the willingness to really bet like the filet mignon of your career on this area where you're getting no feedback. And gosh, if you turns out you're not good after 10 years, you're reinventing yourself.
Right. Yeah. So. And also, you also told me that you should start helping companies that you really like, you really feel the potentials in, right? And that's the way you start.
You don't need to have a checkbook. Be a venture capitalist. This is my buddy Ravi Mohan, is a Kaufman fellow. He taught this from day one. Like, just be a venture capitalist today. Go. Your edge is not your checkbook. Your checkbook is a commodity. It is a commodity. Your edge is what you bring, your talent, your skill. Go use your edge. Get out there and do it with companies. And look, if they won't take your edge for free, your edge isn't very good.
Right. So your advice is don't just start, fundraising, find your sweet spot, find your zone of genius, find out what you want, start helping companies, and then fundraise, invest in them. And it's a long-term commitment, 10 years commitment. Okay.
Yeah. Invest in one, see if you're good. And if you're good, then you got a story.
Awesome.
And I mean, anybody can do it. I think anybody can do it. I think anybody can be trained to do it. But there are things you probably need to do to put yourself in a position to compete at the highest level. It's you have to have a certain level of intelligence, and you have to have a lot of drive. But you can. I think most people can learn how to do it pretty well.
Right. Okay. Well, Phil, I kept you for 1 hour. I know you're a very busy guy. I really appreciate you for being here, and I wish you the best of luck in your cross-border VC fund.
Always good to see you, Rion. Good job on doing this, and anytime I can help, let me know.
Thank you. I hope to see you soon. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Potentialist. We hope you enjoy the show. If you believe in potentials, want to be a miracle maker, a lead thinker, and a trendsetter, please tune into Potentialist and follow us on Instagram and YouTube. See you next week.